We shame you at the table eating only vegetarian food, right? And there are some poor sods out there being shamed at the table having to eat meat, right? So the emphasis is shifted away from everything important, the PTSD, the violence, the hitting, the insanity, the schizophrenia. And it's being focused on passive solar homes, natural itchy wool clothing, right? Vegetarian food, organic food, right? Frankly, I would rather have been raised in a trailer eating hot dogs and buns. What is the horror? What's the horror of horrors for New Age vegetarians? So hot dogs and buns, a trailer park rather than custom artwork, right? A public school rather than a Waldorf school. You see, my godmother, Mary Louise Bedard at the Hawthorne Valley Waldorf School, took people who had symptoms of PTSD and were scared and anxious, and she told me, she would send me into the cellar of the kindergarten at 4 and 5 years old, where I would be eaten alive by witches in the dark for fidgeting. And if I couldn't appreciate the fact that my mother and father had found a godmother to be my kindergarten teacher, if I couldn't appreciate the fact that I had a sociopathic reptile as a Waldorf teacher instead of a sociopathic reptile as a public school teacher, well, I just didn't know what was important, right? What was important was all that money being spent to ensure that I was tormented with better nomenclature, right? With more pristine paradigms, right? With progress, right? I think they probably balance each other out, right? Good organic food, it's got to be worth something. Being asked to go insane and pretend that sociopathic abuse isn't to be counted, and instead all that matters is whether your food is grown with this chemical or that chemical, is a form of insanity that someone, a normal person, isn't asked to digest, right? Because I'm asked to believe that being given complex PTSD, being beaten, being isolated, being lied to, watching my siblings tormented, I'm asked to believe that none of that is important if it's done at a Waldorf school or if it's done in a passive solar home. And that is a lie, right? And because I'm hit for questioning that lie, because I'm shamed for questioning that lie, the pull to become insane is strong. Because if I will just admit, you're right, Mom and Dad, thank you for torturing us in a passive solar home. I'm sure it would have been much, much worse if there hadn't been that extra window there, right? Thank you, right? And going to a Christian community school that's based on Rudolf Steiner, where I feel guilty and a sinner and all of that, just so much better than going to, a Catholic school. Dreadful, right? And learning what a sinner I was over there, right? So, that was kind of the dividing point, the calling my parents by name and creating a clear partition in my head. I'm going to look at each thing they do from the perspective of if I had just met these strangers on the street. And yeah, it seems about normal, seems about right. And to kind of diffuse. And then leaving home at 17, thankfully, with $50 in my home to start my own business because I couldn't start a business at home and manage to be professional with my father sabotaging, right? Because my father required people to want something and need him for something in order to torment them to the maximal effect. Well, he controlled the phone line, right? So if I wanted a business and he controlled the phone line, he could torment me to distraction, right? And I couldn't take that amount of torment. So I had to leave the house. But since that time, none of this strata of identity has gotten adequate work. Believe it or not, in $140,000 of therapy, there isn't a single therapist who has put together a picture of the wounds as well as I have here. There isn't time, apparently, in a 50-minute session to do something like this, right? I didn't have all the language. I thought the therapists knew what they were doing, right? This is a pretty good map of the landscape of pain, of the landscape of shame, of the landscape of grief, of the landscape of loneliness, of the landscape of rage, of crippling despair. It's a good map of the structures that hold those feelings and that exhaustion and that terror, and the exhaustion from holding that terror for so many decades in my body. But seeing how the earth has shaped over millions of years is different from changing any of the striations. How are you going to get into this strata here, right? How are you going to get into this strata and change it when you're up here, when you're way up here, right? How do you get down in there and change what's going on, right? That's something that therapy is not terribly good at a lot of the time. But I do believe there is value in this paradigm, the paradigm of looking how one layer is built upon another layer, the paradigm of understanding pain, loneliness, and grief today in my body through understanding that the soil up here, that my present day pattern of thinking, feeling, speaking, doing, and being, that my present identity is resting on a foundation of patterns down here that our cult knows how to generate but does not know how to transform. This is an honoring, a mirroring, a record of archaeology, of soil, of identity, of biology. These are the patterns that are in my body.